everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. My name is Brian Doyle, and I'm one of the co-hosts today. Of course, with me, as always, I've got Tim McNeil and Rob Rogers. And I almost stumbled on my words there because it's been a few weeks since we've been all together, you know?
I know.
Good to have you guys back here.
I don't have a black eye this time, so I figured I'd show up.
That's good. Well,
I thought it made sense this time.
Tim, everybody knows you play hockey, so nobody would have had an issue with you with the black eye, unless, of course, you had a story behind it that said your wife knocked you out. We'd enjoy to hear that, too. We do not condone domestic abuse, though. But anyhow, with us, you know, as always, I love to say nobody's here to talk to us. They're here for our guest. And today I'm really excited. I've got a guest that I know personally outside of the realm of IT as well, Jason Pufahl, who is the VP of Security Services over at Vancord. And he's been, a great person just to bounce ideas off for a number of years. And I want to thank him for joining us today. Welcome, Jason.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Yeah.
So, Jason, we love to kick things off with the origin story. You know, tell us a little bit about how you found yourself in the world of MSP. Obviously, I'm smiling a little bit because I know a little bit about your background, and I think you might be a little crazy, my man. But in either event, maybe you can share with us a little bit about how you got started.
Yeah, maybe it's not, maybe it's non-traditional. So, I was an English major, but my undergrad degree at least was a Bachelor of Arts in English, and maybe if I'm being honest, maybe a little misdirected when I was younger, didn't have a great goal. But I really had aspired to be a park ranger. So I applied, I lived in Boston, applied for probably 30 national park ranger jobs and one job in an IT role in Boston. And on the same day that I got a volunteer position in Alaska as a park ranger, I also got a paying position it was Prodigy, so an old ISP for those of you who might remember it. And my wife and I sort of sat there and said, we don't make any money today. It would be nice to make some money, and so we opted on the paying IT gig. 25 years later, here I am. So I parlayed, sort of an IT support job, a phone support job, into kind of a really early stage network security position. Right, really back when what I'll call information security was simply nothing more than, hey, we have a firewall and we've done some firewall rules. Over time, sort of left that ISP space. Ultimately ended up in higher ed, sort of long story, ended up as the chief information security officer for the University of Connecticut. Was fortunate to be engaged in just a lot of sort of nonprofit security work. I worked with NERComp. I was on their board of directors. I ended up working with the CEO now of Vancord as part of a software advisory project. That's how he and I had gotten hooked up, Michael Grandy. We developed a great relationship. He was really entrepreneurial. I think it fit my background. I've always been more in that sort of people space, really good at relationships, really good at the development of that. And he said, we're really interested in positioning us much more as a sort of MSSP, getting into that security space. Would you like to join and start our security division? So that's what I did. So, I'm not a park ranger. Someday, maybe when I get to retire, maybe I'll be able to be. But it's been a really fulfilling career for me to date, because I've been fortunate to be part of this information security space kind of since its inception, and just seeing it move from traditional network security to I deal with lawyers now as much as I deal with technology.
And that's something I was going to ask a little bit of question, because when I think back to somebody that was a CISO over at, the University of Connecticut, it is definitely a different world coming out of academia into the MSSP. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think perceptionally, we all think academia kind of moves a little bit slower, a little bit different pace, a little bit, different kind of model. And then you come into, the MSP world, where it seems like everybody's got their hair on fire at least 4 out of the 8 hours every day. What was that transition like for you?
So I have to be careful how I answer. Probably 50% of my security portfolio is still higher eds. So I want to make sure I check this lightly. But there's no doubt it's a different pace. There is a sense of urgency in higher ed for sure. Higher ed is really driven though by a lot of collaboration, a lot of communication. Governance reigns supreme. So things do tend to probably move a bit more slowly. we're about a 50-person company. You can do things typically quicker. There's fewer people to talk to, fewer people to have to make decisions. So from a pace standpoint, and frankly, from growing a business, it's much different, candidly, than I had anticipated. I thought naively, if I'm being honest, I would come in a bit and have processes sort of already established to some degree. Every client, I sort of figured they're going to come with the same issues or the same sensitivities. And the reality is, you're modifying your approach with every client. It's a small business, so you're making on the fly decisions much more regularly than I'd expected. And candidly, I don't think I even as much as I understood a bit that it'd be part of my role, I don't think I understood how much business development would be a key part of what I do every day.
I got a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, please jump in.
I kind of wanted to back up a little bit. You said that you grew up in with an English undergrad, and now you're this, just really powerful cybersecurity guy. How did that transition and certification come about?
They do. So I did get my my CISSP and my CISM. So the ISACA and ISC squared certifications. Honestly, I think the ability to communicate has been my strongest quality throughout my entire career. I have never been the most technical person in the room, even back when, frankly, my job was much more technical. Everybody, and I truly mean this, almost everybody I ever worked with probably was a more talented technical person than I was. But I think I typically had a good vision and the ability to communicate that vision, to be able to get buy-in, to then be able to get things, sort of get projects moving, right? Which is really useful, because I think, technical people aren't always the best communicators. So it was definitely a differentiator for me. And candidly, it's been a big part of what I based my career off of. I have a 16-year-old son, and one of the things I always tell him is, never underestimate the power of likability. And if you can develop those relationships and you can have strong, long-term, good quality relationships, you can go far. And I think that frankly, for me, that's been the name of the game.
There's no doubt that, for the technical resources, there's really two paths they can travel ultimately in their career, right? It's stay in that sole contributor or sole individual contributor role and really get deep into the tech, or start building out and leveraging those personal skills and really getting into more of a management and leadership position. And, when you do get in those leadership positions, it really does come back to business development.
Yeah.
I spent a little time in a Fortune 6 organization, and the CEO used to say, my job is to be the biggest business developer here. He goes, I hire lieutenants to do all the work around me. My job's to make sure that the messaging for the company is heard by our biggest and best customers, and that they know that they can reach me. And it was an interesting perspective that carried with me throughout my career, where you really sit there and say to yourself, it's true. If you're in the seat where you're negotiating with people, where you're engaging with people, you're going to have a pretty good career, as long as you don't, make too many enemies along the way.
And I think as long as you are authentic, I've been on the other side of things where, somebody's in a business development role and you're just being sold. And I really believe, and I've taken this because it's important to me, you need to solve problems, and you need to solve problems in an honest way, and you need to build that partnership. And I think if you do that, then the business development part is really easy. I've had a lot of people sort of say, well, I've segued a bit into sales maybe in my career. And in some ways I certainly have, but it doesn't feel like sales, because I think all we're really doing is having conversations, identifying problems, and hopefully positioning a way to make people's jobs and lives easier. And if that resonates, it's great. And if it doesn't, then maybe there's not a partnership there, right?
Well, I think, to that point, one of the look, you hear it all the time. And we manage salespeople all over the country. The biggest thing that we tell them is, don't be salesy as a salesperson. Like, literally, don't be salesy. Just go in and have an honest conversation. Undig or try and dig out any pain points that they have, and just have a conversation about what they're looking to accomplish. And if you can do that, then you're already ahead of way more than 50% of the reps out there.
I refer to Yeah, I refer to it as stealth sales, right? We talk about it all the time in the realm of the QBR. If you're doing it right, it's not a bang over the head, let's get your roadmap implemented. It's more of a conversation around, here are the things you need to do. This is what it's going to support and the impact that's going to make, and let the customer draw their own conclusions, which ultimately ends up being that sale. So,
Right.
Interesting the approach you got there. Jason, I want to segue a little bit. Another thing I've noticed in my time getting to know you is when you talk about those relationships, they're not just external, it's with your staff. You took a pretty big leap of faith leaving the university environment to go to a startup. And, one of the things that impressed me when I first met you was kind of like the Pied Piper. You had a few followers, but those followers were also very smart humans and individuals as well.
Right.
So, maybe you can talk a little bit about creating culture and how you work with a team to get people to take that passionate jump or that leap of faith and jump with you.
Yeah, I was lucky and fortunate to have, a bunch of my staff from UConn come over here with me. There's a couple of folks who actually had left prior to my joining and were part of a software development team here. Smart people are what you're looking for, right? It's kind of the name of the game, and it's what differentiates, I think, our company from maybe a lot of others, right? Some really talented security people. We were talking really just within the past couple of days, what are the qualities of an MSSP, and sort of, what are those distinguishing characteristics that we bring in comparison to others? And I think it really is the fact that we seeded this with, 8 or so dedicated long-term security engineers, right? It's not like we just sent one person who used to be an infrastructure person to a CISSP class and said, all right, now we're an MSSP because we've got a security certified person. Like, I bring people to bear here who have 10, 15, 20 years worth of information security background to build this practice, right? So it's much more than, can you address patches and fix vulnerabilities? It's compliance management, it's incident response, right? It's in some cases legal advice relative to breach notifications, right? We got a whole ecosystem of partners that we work with, and I think that really makes us a kind of a fully capable and robust MSSP.
And I think it's what you just said there is very relevant, right? We've been doing this for 2.5-ish years at this point, actually coming up on 3, maybe 3 this month, now that I say that. And we've talked to a lot of people, right? MSSPs, MSPs. There are definitely companies out there that they just throw an extra S on, and they think that they're magically going to save the world, and that's not necessarily the case. So that's good on you, right? You're doing it right. That's good.
Yeah, and it's tricky business, right? Because the more you bring the expertise in, and then you've got clients who say, well, if I work with you, I must be secure. And managing that conversation is really delicate, right? So sort of describing to somebody who might not have a really, sort of a rich technical background, because frankly, a lot of what we do is still technical speak, what we do, what risk potentially remains, things that they need to do. Security education is a huge part of what we sort of espouse all of the time. It's a non-technical discipline, but I don't think it gets enough attention because, training people's staff to recognize what the threats are is, in my opinion, as important as installing technology.
No, totally agree. Because you hear all the time, the human factor is really the biggest thing that's keeping people awake at night, right? Most of us fall in the category of being non-targeted targets, right? In the big scheme of things. So, it really is true that, getting that human education out and going beyond, just primary security awareness, but making sure the teams understand what to do and who are the people inside their offices that they should engage when they see something that's, that's challenging. I think that's where a lot of the conversation breaks down in a lot of organizations. The understanding's there, but it's the where to go and how to handle this and what's the next step that can be a little bit challenging.
Yeah, I would say, if there's one thing that I've learned by doing probably 50 plus incident response engagements since we've been here, that human element is so important to train. I wish I could say, every incident was this custom attack by some sophisticated threat actor, but in reality, right, we're just in we're combating organized crime in most cases, right? That's what ransomware is. They're looking for the low-hanging fruit, the quickest return on investment, and frankly, the quickest way to compromise an organization. And the easiest way to do it, send good phishing emails, do some basic social engineering, get somebody to divulge their credentials, and then turn that into the access they need to execute their attacks. Like, that is kind of the roadmap of almost every incident that we've dealt with. And it starts with the people. It doesn't, I haven't had one client where I've done incident response where I simply said, gee, if only you had done zero trust, or if only you had done this other like security control. Those aren't the attack vectors, right? It really is the people that are the risk.
You know, and that's a pretty amazing stat right there. Just, 50 different incidents, and you can pretty much tie every one of them back to an individual.
Really, everyone, but probably two. I mean, two may have been unique. The remainder all followed a pretty simple blueprint.
Wow. Tim, were you about to say something?
What's that? No, you actually covered almost the exact thing I was going to say. So it worked.
So, we've covered a little bit on your backstory. We've covered a little bit on culture here, Jason. Maybe you can share your thoughts in the time we got remaining on, some of the things that we're seeing come down the pike in terms of legislation around compliance. As we record this, the White House really just stepped in with some new cybersecurity discussion as well. As a practitioner, what are you thinking about some of these things that are coming down the pike, and what are you maybe seeing to the future?
So it's interesting you bring up what was just released from the president, because I think it's an example of the focus that information security has now, right? I absolutely deal regularly with things like FTC compliance and GOBA and some of the acronyms that I think everybody's familiar with that have been around for a while, and they're definitely important. What I think we're going to see over the next year or two, though, is simply more legislation relative to security and privacy. And I think it's less about the specific pieces of legislation for me and more about the idea that it's raising that awareness that this is important. And it's sort of forcing that understanding from business owners and executive of companies that they need to take this stuff more seriously, right? That, you probably are being compelled through regulatory requirements, but there's also some basic, corporate social responsibility, right? You need to do the right thing to protect your clients, to protect your employees. And all the legislation we're seeing, I think, just drives that home more for everybody. It's great to see something, though, that is as visible as what was just released, because I think it demonstrates to everybody the seriousness with which they should take this.
Yeah, it's funny. I almost liken this back to when I got started in the industry, where there was so many people that were unaware of what even networks were, right, and what computers could do for you. And there was an educational process that went on there. And then, people became much more in tune with it. Ultimately, digital nomads, folks that grew up with that in their generation started taking roles. And we're seeing almost kind of the same thing happen around security now. It's always been part of the conversation, but people always just kind of looked at it and said, yeah, I've got a firewall. As you said, yeah, I've got antivirus, I've got it covered. And now they're starting to understand a lot more about where these threats really originate from, and are having a little bit more of an eye on it as they see things like, their flights getting canceled, or, or their infrastructure, or we're, down at the Colonial Pipeline, all of a sudden not having, resources that you expect to have for a period of time. It's really driving home some of the real threats that are out there.
It is. And you're seeing, some large scale companies out there. I think LastPass is a good example of, the security company intended to protect all of your credentials that have had a couple of really notable incidents, right? And I think they've handled them really well. And I think they've been very transparent about what actually happened. And in their case, they had an individual who worked at home whose personal computer was targeted as part of that attack, right? So that was reasonably sophisticated for sure. And obviously they have credentials for lots of people and lots of assets. So they're a really ripe target. But it just shows how challenging it is, right? People don't go to that building anymore and have all these controls wrapped around that building. To your point, right? We're pretty nomadic. We've got a podcast going on here. We're all in 4 different locations. Mm-hmm. It's no different for me to work at home than it is in the office, than it is, when somebody's getting a haircut and I have to take them, right? I mean, you can work anywhere at any time. The security requirements around that are vastly different than they were just a handful of years ago.
I joke about it every day. I started my day in Israel today, and my last call will be in Australia. You know,
Right.
it's a brave new world today
just the way
that
it is now.
we're able to work in, and it does open up a lot of security holes when you've got people geographically dispersed accessing the same information, and you know, you can see where the human factor comes into play.
Yeah, for sure. But you know, and with that convenience, you just need to be a little bit more careful. I think you do need to rely a bit more on education. There's certainly tools in the marketplace now that better protect that. I like the idea of the digital nomad, for sure. So you know, the controls or the capabilities are there, but you know, you never underestimate the power of education. And I think that we have a tendency to do that. Certainly in my space.
Yeah.
So, you know, Jason, we're heading into the new year here, 2023. We're accelerating. What are some of the initiatives that you're chasing after with Vancord? And, you know, what are some of is there any upcoming events or anything that you want to share that you're going to be at with the community?
So I will be out in actually just in Providence in a couple of weeks at the annual NERComp conference. So if there's higher ed people that are listening to this, that'd be great. I certainly participate in a bunch of the channel company events. So I expect to be at 2 or 3 of the sort of common ones there, upcoming, and I'll post that ahead of time. If anybody's interested, I'm going to give a shameless plug, Brian, if you don't mind.
Oh, that's what I was trying to set you up for.
Yeah. I've also got a podcast called Cyber Sound. So if anybody's interested in a security focused podcast for sort of business owners, right? It's generally a non-technical podcast. Check that out. I think we have about 70 episodes over the last 18 months or so. Google Vancord Cyber Sound, and you can find that. And I think you'll hit everything, right? So some of the stuff we talked about here today, regulatory requirements issues, cyber liability insurance, incident response, like we kind of cover the wide range of things that I think people should be concerned about.
If you're an MSP ranging up to an MSSP, Jason and Vancord's podcast will really help you understand how you really have to position yourself, how you need to, if you're out really marketing yourself, how to be considered real based on being able to understand the principles that are out there. And we'll give you a little bit of a blueprint to, how to do that indirectly just by listening to them. So, I definitely agree. It's not super tech heavy, which is good for feeble minds like me. And it definitely kind of helps with, really understanding if you're thinking about a career in cybersecurity, thinking about broadening those scopes, gives you a good taste of what you're going to deal with out in the market space.
And frankly, it gives you a taste of who you're going to deal with. I tell people, if you like what you hear on the podcast, that's what you get with us. And if you don't, we might not be the people for you. So, we are who we are.
Yeah. Very cool.
Awesome.
Well, we will be including your, that podcast link, for anybody that wants to get in touch with you when we put this up on mspbusinessschool.com and up on YouTube. So you don't have to worry about that. And if you're listening, we'll have it right up there for you. Brian, Jason, Tim, any closing thoughts today?
For me, I would simply say, take security seriously. Don't do it just because you're compelled. Do it because it is the right thing to do for your business. It doesn't have to be as complicated as people make it out to be. Going back to that incident response comment I made earlier, there's a set of fundamentals that if you implement them, you make yourself at least a less attractive target than a lot of your peers. So you want to get to that threshold at a bare minimum. And we're happy to have conversations around what that might be if people are interested.
Yeah, outstanding. Okay, fellas, it's always great to chat with you. I wish you guys the best. It was great chatting with you, Jason. Take care, fellas.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.